subject of this educational session is on crafting an effective introduction. And introductions are really quite an important part of our speeches for a variety of reasons. First of all, they provide a smooth transition. So when a member gets up to speak, they're effectively taking on a new role. And the purpose of the introduction then is to create a smooth transition to move the audience into an anticipation of that role. Secondly, it's to establish the proper mindset in the audience. Generally speaking, with a well-crafted introduction, the audience will become more receptive to the message that is being communicated in the speech, and generally can appreciate the presentation more. And then the last point really is to make some comments about the speaker's authority. So if there are elements of the speaker's background or credentials that can be brought to relate to the actual subject matter, the introduction can do that, as well as to draw some parallels to what the audience may be interested in receiving. So if you can explain, as the introducer, the benefit that the audience will derive from the speech, that helps the audience appreciate it more. Now, generally speaking, for all introductions, there are a number of key elements, and perhaps the most important one is the speaker's name. Now, it's important that the introducer speak the speaker's name very clearly. If the pronunciation is at all tricky, work it out ahead of time, spell it out phonetically so that when it comes time to actually pronounce the name, you've got it right. Secondly, the speech topic is an important one. You definitely want to draw attention to how I mentioned earlier, how the speech topic will benefit the audience. That makes a big difference. And the speech title, you want to make sure that you're able to convey that very clearly and quite prominently. So next to the speaker's name, the speech title is something you want to make sure you get right and pronounce very clearly so that the audience can understand what they're going to hear. Now with Toastmasters, it goes one step further. There's general introduction considerations that I just talked about, but with Toastmasters, you're generally presenting some sort of a speech project. So one of the first things to note is, what speech assignment is it? What manual is it coming from? Which speech number? What is the purpose behind that speech? Which leads me to the second point, which is the stated objectives of the speech. Now often the manual will actually list out what the objectives are for that speech to teach the speaker. But beyond that, each speaker might have some specific things that they actually want to work on. And the speaker will have communicated that to the introducer. And for the introducer then to convey that to the audience, it helps the audience understand what the speaker is really trying to convey and what to work on during that presentation. And then lastly, the delivery time. It's usually the case that our speeches are 5 to 7 minutes, but not always. This one's a great example. This is 10 to 15. It helps if the introducer is able to tell the timer what to expect. Also, if you want the lights on at a certain time, that's just easier to announce that at the very outset. Next, we talk about drafting the introduction. Now, really the purpose of an introduction is to create a friendly environment for the speaker to begin speaking. So the approach that is often suggested is for you to imagine that you're the speaker and try to figure out what sort of an environment you would like to have set for you. What would make you the most comfortable when you're coming up to address the audience? Now, the length of the introduction is an interesting one. It's really supposed to be 30 seconds to maybe 45 seconds, not too long. That's about the right length for a manual speech. Now, if there's a much longer speech, you can have an introduction that might go up to about 2 minutes or so, but don't go too much longer than that. The audience is there to hear the speaker, not the introducer. Now, delivery is always an interesting one. I talk sometimes about a greased chute. When you're actually doing an introduction, you really want to polish that introduction, so especially with the name and the title, so that when you deliver it, it's very smooth. You don't stumble over the name or stumble over the title. So it pays to take a little extra time to make that smooth ahead of time. It makes the audience really appreciate the introduction more. It makes the speaker appreciate the introduction more. And then lastly, ask for clarification from the speaker about what things they would like to have included in the introduction. Now this is an interesting one. Applying restraints. So there's about 6 items, 6 don'ts for introducers. And some of these are a little bit interesting. Don't upstage the speaker. It's important to remember that as the introducer, you're there to help the audience build anticipation for the speech and to really set the stage for the speaker. You're not there to put on a performance of your own. So what you really don't want to do is be sharing a lot of your own personal experiences or opinions or attitudes. It's not about you. It's about setting the stage for the speaker. Don't steal the speaker's thunder. The introduction is not intended to be a preview of the speech. So really, you need to resist the temptation to add too much information that's going to reveal what the speakers are planning to talk about. This is really to build anticipation, not to be a preview. The third point is an important one. Don't surprise the speaker. Now, I mentioned earlier the point of the introduction is to create a friendly environment for that speaker. You really want to avoid anything that might embarrass or distract the speaker from their message. The fourth point is also an interesting one, because we all tend to do this to a certain extent. But you want to be careful not to overdo any praise of the speaker's skills. If you come up and introduce somebody as the funniest person in the club, for example, that sets an expectation that might be hard to meet. And you don't want to get to the stage where the speaker comes up and feels that they need to somehow apologize for the overzealous introduction. So be careful not to go too far with that. It's best to let the audience decide on how effective the speaker's skills are. Don't rely on cliches. Now this is one that we talk about every now and then when somebody says, "and without further ado," and launches into the introduction. Those are cliches. We really don't need them. Just go ahead with the introduction and try to avoid the perfunctory words. And then lastly, don't save the speaker's name until last. Unless you have some sort of a mystery guest where there's a huge amount of anticipation and at the very end you're going to reveal the identity of the speaker, it's just a lot more natural to say, "Our speaker tonight is Josephine, and she will be doing whatever she'll be doing, so please help me welcome Jo." It actually flows a lot more naturally to be speaking the speaker's name throughout the introduction, where it makes sense. Not very well, Gary. There we go. Speaker's responsibilities. So it's a bit of a two-way street, actually, preparing an effective introduction. It's not all the introducer trying to figure it out. We really have to have a conversation with the speakers to make sure that we've included the right information. So to the speaker, you need to make sure that you're available to provide the appropriate and relevant speech-related info. And in our case, this often means we send some information by email ahead of time, or if we haven't had a chance to do that, to meet up with the person who's going to be introducing us either before the meeting or at the very latest at the break. But in all fairness to the introducer, it's a lot better to get that information out ahead of time. Because if you want to actually have your introducer practice and the delivery and make it smooth, it really needs to be there ahead of time. The other point is to inform the introducer of any special considerations, like there's going to be a question and answer period at the end, or anything that might be unusual in a speech. So if they know that ahead of time, they can announce that at the beginning so the audience knows what to expect. I think that's a really important thing.